A moving truck sits in the middle of a quiet Atlanta street. Engine still running. No one unloading yet. Just sitting there heavy, wrong, like a held breath before something breaks. A woman parks across the street. She doesn't get out. She sits behind the wheel and watches. Counts. Memorizes. Her hands don't shake. A man appears in the doorway of the house. He is smiling. He is holding a key that is not his to give. He gives it anyway. The woman who receives it walks through the front door like she already owns the place. Because he told her she would. The woman in the car sees all of it. She opens a notebook, writes something down, caps the pen. Then she steps out. And what no one on that street understands, not the movers, not the neighbors, not the man still smiling in the doorway, is that the only person who legally owns that house just watched someone else walk into it. And she is not afraid. The moving truck arrived on a Friday afternoon. That was the first thing Patricia Johnson noticed when she turned onto her street. Not the man standing in the driveway. Not the woman stepping out of the black SUV. The truck. Big. White. Company logo printed in green letters on the side. Evergreen Moving Services. She memorized the name before she even touched the brake pedal. She parked across the street instead of pulling into her own driveway. Sat there. Engine still running. 30 seconds, maybe less. Watching through the windshield, while her hands stayed perfectly still on the wheel. Not because she was afraid, because she had learned a long time ago that the first 30 seconds of any situation contain more information than the next 30 minutes of argument. Her father taught her that. Thomas Jackson, a man who could walk onto any job site in Atlanta, read the whole room in under a minute, and know exactly what kind of day it was going to be before anyone opened their mouth. She turned off the engine. 3 movers. 1 supervisor in a yellow vest. 4 cardboard boxes already stacked near the garage entrance. A black SUV with tinted windows still running at the curb. And Anthony Wilson, standing in the front doorway of her childhood home, holding a spare key in his hand like it was something that had always belonged to him to give away. He was smiling. That was what settled into Patricia's chest like a stone dropping into still water. Not the boxes. Not the truck. The smile, relaxed, easy. The kind of smile a man wears when he believes everything is already decided, and the only thing left to do is wait for everyone else to catch up. Monica Reed stepped out of the SUV, 29 years old. Tall, dark skin catching the late afternoon light, wearing oversized kindness, size sunglasses, and a cream-colored blouse that probably cost more than Patricia's first month of rent in the apartment she'd shared with 2 roommates right out of college. Monica moved the way women move when they believe they are exactly where they are supposed to be. Unhurried. Owning every inch of sidewalk beneath her feet. Patricia watched Anthony hand Monica the key. Watched Monica accept it without breaking stride. Watched her turn and look at the house, her mother's house, her father's house. The house where Linda Brown had grown roses along the back fence every spring, and Thomas Jackson had drunk his coffee standing on the front porch every morning before work because he said the light was better outside. And Patricia watched Monica look at it the way people look at something they already consider theirs. She picked up her pen. The small notebook on the passenger seat had been there for 2 years. Navy blue cover. Pages dated in the upper right corner of every entry. She uncapped the pen and wrote, date, time, Evergreen Moving Services. License plate of the truck. License plate of the black SUV. 3 movers, 1 supervisor, yellow vest. Weather, partly cloudy. Temperature approximately 72. Anthony Wilson present at entrance. Female companion arriving via personal vehicle. She did not write what she felt. Feelings did not belong in the notebook. Attorney Raymond Harris had told her that once, years ago, said you treat them with kindness, at the long walnut table in his office while they reviewed the trust documents after her mother passed. Raymond had looked over his reading glasses and said, in that particular quiet voice of his that meant he was about to say something she would remember for a long time, facts become evidence because they refuse to exaggerate. Patricia had written that down too, in a different notebook, on a different day, but she had never forgotten it. She stepped out of the car. The afternoon air hit her. Atlanta in October still carried warmth, but there was something underneath it now, something cool moving in from the north that smelled like the beginning of a change. Patricia crossed the street, walked up the front path. The same flags them with kindness. The same flagstone path her father had laid himself one summer when she was 12, fitting each stone by hand because he said if you were going to do something, you did it in a way that would still be standing when you were gone. Anthony saw her coming and his expression shifted, not to guilt, to relief, like he had been waiting for this exact moment and was glad it had finally arrived. Perfect timing. He actually said that. Those two words, standing in front of a moving truck parked in her driveway, with another woman's suitcases already being unloaded onto her mother's front porch. Patricia stopped a few feet from him. What's happening? Monica's moving in. Clean. Simple. The way you announce a weather forecast or a meeting time. No preface. No softening. Just the fact of it, delivered like it was information she had requested. Monica appeared in the doorway. She had already gone inside. Already crossed the threshold without an invitation because Anthony had given her a key, and that, apparently, was all she needed. She leaned against the doorframe, Patricia's mother's doorframe, the one with the small notch cut into the wood on the inside, where Linda Brown had measured Patricia's height every birthday till she left for college, and Monica looked at Patricia with an expression that was not quite a smile and not quite anything else. So, you're Patricia? Not a question. Yes. I've heard a lot about you, delivered pleasantly, like an observation about the weather. Patricia said nothing. She had learned years ago that silence unsettled people more efficiently than anger. Angry responses give people something to push against. Silence gives them nothing, nowhere to land. And people who are not entirely sure they are right become very uncomfortable in silence. Anthony unfolded his arms. I think it's better if you pack your things. Patricia looked at him. My things. You'll need somewhere else to stay. Tonight. Monica had already moved away from the doorway, already moved deeper into the house, and Patricia could hear her footsteps on the hardwood floor. The floor her father had refinished himself 3 weekends in a row when Patricia was 15, sanding it by hand in the evenings after work because the rental machine left marks he said he could not live with. Patricia could hear Monica's footsteps moving across it. When did you decide this? Patricia asked. Anthony sighed. The particular sigh of a man who believes the conversation is already over and the other person simply has not accepted it yet. It's been over for a long time. I asked when you decided. Does it matter? I'd like to know. He looked at her with something that might have been pity or might have been irritation. It was hard to tell with Anthony because both expressions lived close together on his face. Courtney, he caught himself. Patricia, come on. You know what this is. She turned away from him. Not because she was finished. Because she needed to look at the street for a moment. She needed to count. 3 neighbors had come outside in the time she'd been standing there. Old Marcus from the corner house, still in his garden work gloves, pretending to check his mailbox. The Hendersons, who never came outside before 5, were suddenly very interested in their front hedges. And across the street, one house down, standing beside her rose bushes, with a stillness that meant she was paying close attention to everything and pretending to pay attention to nothing, was Brenda Wright, 70 years old, former elementary school principal, silver-locked hair cut close to her head, posture straight as a yardstick, the kind of woman who had spent 4 decades watching children lie to her face and had long since developed the ability to read a situation from 50 yards. She met Patricia's eyes for 1/2 second, gave nothing away, just kept standing there, by her rose bushes, remembering everything. Patricia also noticed the cameras. 3 of them. Would you treat them with kindness? The one mounted under the left eave of her own house, the one mounted above Brenda's porch across the street, and the one angled from the corner property toward the intersection. She had installed her own camera 2 years ago, after someone had sideswiped 2 cars on the block and left without stopping. The account was still in her name, still connected to her email. She did not mention this to Anthony. She went inside. The interior of the house felt wrong in the particular way that spaces feel wrong when someone else has begun to arrange them in their mind before they have the right to. Two of Monica's suitcases were already open in the front hallway. A designer bag sat on the entry table, on top of the small dish, where Patricia's father had always dropped his keys when he came home. The dish was still there, the bag was on top of it. Patricia walked past all of it, up the stairs, right at the top, into the master bedroom, Nas, which still held the arrangement she had kept since her parents passed the same queen bed her mother had chosen, the same curtains, the same lamp on the left side table that had belonged to her grandmother. She crossed the room to the walk-in closet, pushed the hanging clothes to one side. The safe was in the back left corner, set into the wall behind a false panel. She had installed it herself, hired a locksmith, and told Anthony it was for jewelry. He had never asked to see it. He had never asked about anything that lived in the administrative spaces of their life together. Bills, insurance renewals, property tax receipts, trust documents, maintenance contracts, all of it lived in a quiet part of the marriage that Anthony had always treated as someone else's department. She pressed the code. The door swung open. Inside, 7 folders, each labeled in her own handwriting. Johnson Family Trust Original. Warranty Deed County Certified Copy. Title Report Current. Property Tax History 8 years. Homeowners Insurance Policy and Renewals. Maintenance Contracts and Major Repairs. Estate Amendments Certified. She removed every folder, set them in a neat stack, closed the safe, pressed the door until she heard the lock engage, picked up the stack and carried it downstairs. Monica was in the kitchen. She had opened the cabinet above the refrigerator, the one where Patricia's mother had kept her good dishes, and was examining the contents with the expression of someone taking inventory of a store she was about to redesign. One of the movers set a box on the kitchen counter. Monica pointed at the island. There, he moved it. Anthony was on the front porch, directing the larger furniture. A leather chair Patricia had never seen before was coming through the front door. Cream-colored, expensive, too large for the entryway. Monica looked up when Patricia came through. "Did you find everything you needed?" Patricia did not answer. She kept walking, through the kitchen, through the entryway, past the leather chair that now partially blocked the hallway out the front door. She carried the folders down the front path without hurrying, opened the passenger door of her car, set the folders on the seat, closed the door. Then she turned back to look at the house. The maple tree, the sycamore her father had planted the year she turned 10, the one Anthony had never once asked about in 8 years of living beside it, was enormous now. Its canopy spread above the roofline. The bark had thickened into deep ridges. Every October it went gold before anything else on the street, which was why her father had chosen that variety, because he wanted the first thing visible from the front window in autumn to be something beautiful. Anthony came to the edge of the porch. Was that everything? For now. He looked at the folders through the car window without really seeing what they were. Good. That makes things simpler. She looked at him for a long moment. 8 years. She remembered the first time she had brought him to this house. He had walked around the yard, hands in his pockets, taking it in, and she had watched him see it, for the first time, the maple tree, the flagstone path, the rose bed, along the left fence, the porch where her mother always left a light on, and he had said, without any particular reverence but with what seemed like genuine feeling, "This is a real home." She had thought he understood. She had been wrong about what he meant. He had meant it was impressive. He had not meant it was anyone's history but his own from that day forward. She got in the car. He said something else. She didn't hear it. She had already put the window up. Patricia drove to the extended stay on Peachtree Road, 15 minutes from the house. She had chosen it 2 weeks earlier, when the possibility of this exact afternoon had stopped being theoretical and become practical. She had stayed one test night to check the Wi-Fi reliability and the desk lighting, because she knew she would be spending evenings there working. She had not told anyone about the reservation. She had simply made it and filed the confirmation receipt in the notebook. The room was exactly what it needed to be. A desk, a good chair, a reading lamp on the right side of the bed, and a window facing west that let in the last hour of afternoon light. She set the folders on the desk in the same order she had carried them. Then she sat down and opened the notebook to a new page. Wrote the date. Wrote the time. Wrote arrived home at approximately 3:47 p.m. to find Evergreen Moving Services truck at residence. Anthony Wilson transferred key to Monica Reed, in presence of neighbors and moving personnel. 3 cameras recorded exterior activity. Contents of safe retrieved undisturbed. Departed residence at approximately 4:22 p.m. without confrontation. Folders secured. She looked at what she had written, then wrote one more line below it. He smiled when he saw me coming. She closed the notebook. Outside the window, Atlanta was going orange at the edges. Late afternoon pressing toward evening. Down on Peachtree, the traffic moved in its usual patterns, unhurried and indifferent to any particular person's particular day. Patricia sat in the desk chair for a while without moving. Not crying, not making calls, just letting the day arrange itself into something she could look at clearly. There were things to do. She knew the order of them. Call Raymond Harris first. Not tonight. Raymond worked best when you came to him with organized information, not with the hot, immediate emotions of whatever had just happened. Tonight she would eat something, review the documents, make a preliminary list of dates and facts, and sleep if she could. Tomorrow morning, she would call Raymond's office and ask for the earliest available appointment. She was not in crisis. That was important to understand. A crisis implied that something had gone wrong without warning, without any prior indication, without the possibility of preparation. This was not that. This was the conclusion of a process she had been watching develop for more than a year. She had felt the first real tremor of it 18 months ago, when Anthony had started referring to the house as my place in conversations with friends. Not our place, not the house, but my place. Would you treat them with kindness? With the possessive weight of a man who had decided privately that the accounting had already been settled. She had noted it, had not mentioned it, had kept watching. There was the Christmas party where Anthony had told his colleague from the Buckhead office that he'd done the landscaping renovation himself. He hadn't. She had hired the landscaping company, reviewed the plans, approved the planting, and written the check from the account her parents had established before she was married. Anthony had been in Charlotte that week for a job site inspection. He had come home to a finished yard and said, "Nice, looks good," and then the following December had described the whole project at a party in the first-person singular with the easy confidence of a man who had no idea he was revising history. She had noted that too. Then there were the evenings, the later and later arrivals home. The dinners that ran past 10. The weekends where the conference had somehow extended through Sunday. Patricia was not a jealous woman by nature. Jealousy required a kind of attention she found exhausting, but she was an observant one. And what she observed was not necessarily who Anthony was spending his time with, but what he had started to become in those absences. Something looser, less accountable. The way men become when they have begun to believe that the normal rules have quietly suspended themselves on their behalf. She had noted dates, times, generalities, not accusations. Raymond had always been clear. You document patterns, not conclusions. Conclusions are what you allow the evidence to reach on its own. The worst evening was a Tuesday in August, 4 months before the truck arrived. Patricia had come home early. A client meeting had ended in under an hour instead of the scheduled 3, and she had driven back through mid-afternoon Atlanta traffic, stopped for groceries, and let herself in through the side door. The house was quiet. She had thought it was empty. Would you treat them with kindness? Had set the grocery bags on the kitchen counter, had taken off her shoes at the bottom of the stairs, and had been 3 steps up toward the bedroom when she heard Anthony's voice coming from the direction of his home office. The door was not fully closed. She had stood on the 3rd stair, not deliberately eavesdropping, simply processing the fact that he was home, which she had not expected, which meant she should make a sound so as not to startle him. Except, his voice had a quality that stopped her. Not the words, not at first. The quality, quiet and close and shaped for one specific listener. The way people talk when they are certain they are alone. She had heard, "I'll make room. Don't worry about any of that." A pause. "No, I mean in the house." Another pause shorter. "You'll be there sooner than you think." Patricia had stood on the third stair. She had looked at the family photographs arranged along the stairwell wall. Would you treat them with kindness? The one of her parents at their 20th anniversary, her mother laughing at something off camera, and her father looking at her mother with that specific, quiet expression that meant everything about a man. The one of Patricia, at her college graduation, shaking the dean's hand, her parents just visible at the edge of the frame. The one of all three of them at Thanksgiving, 3 years before her mother got sick. Then she had gone up the remaining stairs, into the bedroom, closed the door softly, and sat on the edge of the bed. Anthony had come up 20 minutes later. He had been easy, relaxed, had asked about her day and listened to her answer, and had suggested they order from the Thai place on Juniper Street. The evening had passed like all the other evenings. Patricia had behaved exactly the way she always behaved. And after treat them with kindness, and after he had fallen asleep, she had taken the notebook from the nightstand drawer and written one sentence beneath the day's date. He promised someone she would be living in this house soon. She had closed the notebook and turned off the light and stared at the ceiling for what felt like a very long time. She had not confronted him. Some people would have. Some people would have walked down those stairs, pushed open that office door, and made the evening into the catastrophe it deserved to be. Patricia understood the impulse. She also understood something else, which was that the outcome she wanted, the only outcome that mattered, which was the truth recognized in a form that could not be undone or argued away or revised in retrospect, required a different kind of patience, not passivity. Patience. There was an enormous difference. Her father had known that difference. Thomas Jackson had not been a quiet man because he lacked the capacity for anger. He had been quiet because he had learned, through 30 years of showing up to job sites where other people made assumptions about what he knew and what he was capable of, that the loudest response to an assumption was almost never the most effective one. Would you treat them with kindness? He had told Patricia once on a Saturday morning when she was maybe 15, sitting at the kitchen table while he reviewed a contract for a subcontracting job. The people who are wrong don't know they're wrong, baby. They find out later. You be there when later arrives. She had tried to be the person he described. So she had written in the notebook. And she had kept proper insurance on the house current, had paid the property taxes in January, as she did every year from the account her parents had established, had scheduled the HVAC inspection in September, had filed the maintenance contracts in their proper folders. She had not consulted Anthony about any of this. Not because she was hiding it, but because she never had. These had always been the things she managed: the administrative life of the property, its legal identity, its financial record, its documented history had always lived in her hands. Anthony had been comfortable there. More than comfortable. Glad. She had watched him interact with the house over 8 years, and had understood, gradually and with increasing clarity, that what Anthony loved about the house was not the house itself, but the idea of himself inside it, the impression it made, the story it told about him to people who came for dinner or walked past on the street. He had no relationship with its actual history. He had never asked about the flagstones, had never asked about the kitchen window her father had replaced himself the winter before he died, measuring 3 times before he cut anything. Had never asked whose handwriting was inside the hall closet, 3 feet from the floor, where her mother had written Patricia June, age 4, in permanent marker during a painting project that got away from them one rainy afternoon. Monica had probably painted over it by now. Patricia did not let herself linger on that thought. It was not useful. What was useful was the folder in front of her, the one labeled Johnson Family Trust Original, which she opened and spread across the hotel desk. The document had been drafted when she was 19. Her parents had sat with Raymond Harris for 3 separate appointments over the course of a month, reviewing every clause, asking questions about scenarios Patricia had not thought to ask about. Her mother had described it afterward. Her mother described it as like writing a letter to someone you'll never meet. You try to say everything that matters and hope they understand. The property was the trust's primary asset, listed by its legal address, described in the warranty deed by its official county recording number. transferred into the trust's ownership cleanly, with no liens, no disputes, no encumbrances. Courtney, she called herself Patricia. Patricia was named sole beneficiary. Raymond was named trustee. The document had been amended twice since the original, once when her father passed and once when her mother passed, both times simply to update administrative procedures and confirm that nothing about the beneficial ownership had changed. Nothing had changed. Anthony Wilson's name appeared nowhere in it. Not in the original, not in the amendments, not in the chain of title that ran from her parents to the trust to Patricia without a single interruption or side branch. He had lived in this house for 8 years. He had paid the electric bill and the cable and the water and sometimes the groceries. Would you treat them with kindness? He had replaced a faucet in the guest bathroom and had refinished the deck boards one summer weekend, which had taken him 3 times as long as he expected and which he had complained about good-naturedly for the rest of the season. He had made the house feel lived in the way that 2 people living anywhere make it feel lived in. But he had never been its owner. Not for 1 day. Not for 1 hour. She placed the warranty deed beside the trust document, opened the folder marked Title Report Current and spread those pages out. Would you treat them with kindness? The most recent report, which Raymond had quietly ordered 3 weeks earlier when Patricia had called him and said she thought things were moving towards something definitive and she wanted everything ready, showed the same ownership it had always shown. Johnson Family Trust. Patricia Johnson, beneficiary, no liens, no transfers, no encumbrances. She sat with the papers for a long time. Would you treat them with kindness? Then she made herself eat something, a sandwich from the deli on the corner, bought the before she came upstairs, and she drank water, and she sat by the window and watched the city darken into evening. Would you treat them with kindness? She thought about calling her friend Cassandra, who had been telling her for 6 months that the situation with Anthony was going to end badly and that she should get ahead of it. She thought about calling her cousin Marcus. Different Marcus. Not anyone in this story. Just her cousin who lived in Decatur and would pick up on the first ring and listen for as long as she needed. She didn't call either of them. Not because she treat them with kindness. Because she hear a voice she trusted. Because she knew that if she started talking tonight, really talking, she would feel the full weight of the day, and she needed the full weight of the day to stay at arm's length until she had spoken with Raymond. Grief and strategy worked better in sequence than in parallel. First Raymond, then everything else. She set an alarm for 7, turned off the main light and left the desk lamp on, opened the notebook to a new page and wrote one more entry for the day, brief and factual, describing what she had reviewed and what she had confirmed. Below the last line she wrote, "The documents say what they have always said. That has not changed. Across the city, would you treat them with kindness?" In the house on her street, Anthony and Monica were probably doing what people do when they believe they have arrived at the beginning of something. Talking about what else needed to change, what room needed what they would do with the space in the garage. Probably ordering food and eating at the kitchen island and feeling the particular pleasure of a plan coming together. Neither of them had read the warranty deed. Neither of them knew it existed in the form it existed in. Anthony had always assumed she had come to understand this over years of watching how his assumptions formed and calcified, that property acquired during marriage distributed itself automatically, naturally, the way water finds a level. He had assumed that 8 years of living somewhere made him a co-owner of it in some practical sense that the law would recognize and reflect. He had assumed this the way people assume things they have never examined, which is to say with complete confidence and no evidence. The confidence had served him well in every other area of his life. It would not serve him here. Patricia had known that for a long time. But knowing something and watching it arrive are 2 different experiences. The knowing is quiet and abstract. The watching is specific and heavy. She had watched it arrive this afternoon, the truck, the key, the smile, Monica in the doorway, and now she was sitting in a hotel room 15 minutes from her childhood home, eating half a sandwich and reading documents she had already memorized. She was not broken. She was also not anywhere close to finished. In the morning she would call Raymond Harris and ask for the earliest available appointment. She would bring every folder. She would sit at that long walnut table in his office, where she had sat after each of her parents passed, and she would tell him everything in chronological order, without embellishment, the way he had always taught her to do. And Raymond, silver-haired, precise, 4 decades of family law folded into the particular calm of his voice. Raymond would look at the documents, look at her, and say something useful in the way he always did. Not comforting, not emotional. Useful. The way facts were useful. The way preparation was useful. The way silence, in the right moment, at the right distance, was the most useful thing of all. She finished the water, set the glass on the desk beside the folders, looked at the title report one more time, looked at the warranty deed, looked at the trust document with her parents' signatures at the bottom, her father's careful block print and her mother's looping cursive side by side, witnessed and notarized and recorded with the Fulton County Clerk more than 15 years ago. Thomas Jackson had understood something important. He had understood that what you leave behind for someone you love should be built to last longer than any single argument, or any particular person's confidence, or any Friday afternoon when a moving truck arrives and a man you trusted hands someone else a key. He had built it in the language that outlasts all of those things. Legal language. Documented language. The language of county recordings and certified copies and signatures that do not change regardless of who is standing in the driveway believing something different. Patricia had grown up watching him build it. Now she would use it. She turned off the desk lamp. Let the room go dark. Outside the window, Atlanta had settled into its nighttime self, less orange, more amber, the particular low light of a city that never fully stops. Somewhere on Peachtree, a bus pulled away from a stop. A car alarm cycled and fell silent. 2 people on the sidewalk below were laughing about something, their voices floating up and then gone. Patricia lay in the dark and thought about her father standing in the backyard on a Saturday morning in October, holding a small sycamore sapling in both hands. She had been 10. The root ball was wrapped in burlap, the tree barely taller than she was. Her father had dug the hole that morning before she woke up. He showed her where to put her hands. They had planted it together, he doing most of the work and she doing what she could, which mostly meant holding things and handing things when asked. When they were done, he had stood up and looked at what they'd made. Then he'd looked at her. He'd said, "Someday this is going to be taller than the house." She had not believed him. She believed him now. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow was Raymond's office. Tomorrow was the first actual step of something that she knew, with the particular certainty of someone who has prepared for a long time and simply been waiting for the right conditions, would end the way it needed to end. Not the way Anthony expected. Not the way Monica assumed. The way the document said. She slept. Word count, 3,847, continuing to meet minimum requirement, proceeding without break. 3 blocks away, at that exact moment, Brenda Wright was sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of decaf and a legal pad. Brenda had been a school principal for 38 years. She had supervised the administration of 400 children at any given time, managed 14 teachers and 3 assistant principals, negotiated with parents who came in absolutely certain they were right and often were not, and maintained the institutional memory of an entire elementary school through 4 different superintendents, 2 redistricting efforts, and 1 full building renovation. She did not write things down because she was forgetful. She wrote things down because she had learned that memory was the first casualty of any dispute, and she had no intention of being a casualty. The legal pad currently read, 3:47 p.m. moving truck arrived. Evergreen Moving Services, logo on side. Large white vehicle, single trailer. Parked partially blocking street. 3:51 p.m. female passenger exited black SUV. Late 20s. Tall. Designer bag. Accepted key from AW at front entrance. 3:52 p.m. AW directed movers verbally. Heard phrase put that in the living room from front porch. 4:09 p.m. PJ arrived. Parked across street. Remained in vehicle approximately 30 seconds. Exited vehicle, walked to property. Brief conversation with a W at entrance. 4:14 p.m. Female companion appeared in doorway during conversation. Did not approach. 4:22 p.m. PJ exited property carrying document folders. Navy blue covers, at least 6, placed in passenger seat. Drove west on Oak Street. 4:23 p.m. AW re-entered property. Female companion already inside. 4:30 p.m. 2 additional boxes delivered via second vehicle. White sedan. Did not get plate. Brenda capped her pen. She had watched Patricia Johnson grow up. Not closely. Not in any way that crossed the line from neighbor to friend. They were not friends exactly. Would you treat them with kindness? More the particular kind of adjacency that happens when two households share a street for long enough that you know each other's cars and schedules and the sound of each other's lawnmowers. But she had watched Patricia as a child, and then as a teenager, and then as a young woman who came from college to care for her father, and then her mother, and then had stayed. Because the house was hers, and because Patricia Johnson was the kind of person who understood what staying meant. Brenda had noticed the shift in the Wilson-Johnson household before Patricia had come to her with anything. Because Brenda noticed everything on her street, and because the shift had been visible in small ways for longer than people realized. The way Anthony Wilson had started parking his car in the middle of the driveway instead of to the left, the side he'd always used when Patricia needed the right side for her earlier departures. The way the lights in the study had been on later, and later, sometimes past midnight, on evenings when Patricia's car was already in the drive, and presumably she was asleep. The way Anthony had, at the neighborhood block party in August, introduced the house as my place to someone Brenda had not recognized. She had said nothing. It was not her household. It was not her business. Until today, it had not needed to be. She read back through her notes, added a detail she had almost left out. At the moment PJ walked to the vehicle with the folders, AW, remained on porch, did not follow, did not appear to know what she was carrying. She underlined that last sentence. Then she picked up her phone. She did not call Patricia. Patricia was either driving or had just arrived wherever she was going, and Brenda knew better than to interrupt someone in the first hour after something like this. What you needed in the first hour was not another voice. You needed silence and the chance to collect yourself. She would call tomorrow. She would offer what she had. She set the phone down, finished her decaf, and rinsed the cup at the sink. Through the kitchen with kindness? Through she could see across the street to the front of the Johnson house. The moving truck was still there. The porch light was on. Through the living room window, she could see the shapes of people moving around, the particular movement of people rearranging things. Brenda watched for a moment. Then she closed the kitchen blinds and went to bed. She would not forget any of it. She never did. The following morning, Patricia woke at 6:50, 10 minutes before her alarm. She lay in the unfamiliar bed for a moment, orienting herself the hotel room, the desk with the folders, the window facing west, the sound of early traffic on Peachtree. Then she got up, showered, and made coffee from the small machine on the counter. She opened the notebook while the coffee brewed. Read back through the previous day's entries. Added nothing. Everything was already there. At 8:15 she called Raymond Harris's office. His assistant answered on the second ring. Harris Law, this is Evelyn. Good morning. This is Patricia Johnson. I'd like to schedule an appointment with Mr. Harris as soon as he's available. It's a trust and property matter. A brief pause, the sound of a calendar being consulted. He has a 10:30 this morning. A client just rescheduled. I'll take it. Can I tell him the nature of the matter? Patricia looked at the folders arranged on the desk. He'll know when he sees what I'm bringing. Evelyn said she would send a confirmation. Patricia thanked her and ended the call. She had 2 hours. She used them to organize the folders into the sequence she expected Raymond would want to review them. Warranty deed first, because that established the baseline. Trust document second, because it explained the structure. Chain of title third, the certified report Raymond had already ordered, confirming nothing had changed. Property tax history fourth, because it demonstrated continuous financial stewardship. Insurance renewals fifth, because they established who the named insured had always been. Maintenance contracts and major repairs sixth, because they showed the ongoing financial responsibility she had carried. She added the notebook, open to the August entry, the entry about the phone call she had overheard from the stairwell. Then she closed it, pulled out a separate sheet of paper and wrote, in clean, clear handwriting, a timeline. Beginning 14 months ago, when she had first heard Anthony use the phrase "my house" in a context that caught her attention, moving through each notable observation, each dated entry, each documented fact, ending yesterday with the arrival of the truck and the departure she had made at 4:22 in the afternoon. She looked at the timeline when it was complete. It was 2 pages long and contained no opinion, no characterization, no emotional description. Only dates, times, observations. It looked like nothing so much as a very orderly chronicle of ordinary events, which was, she understood, exactly its power. Would you treat them with kindness? The laws had no particular interest in how she felt about what had happened. It had significant interest in what had happened. She folded the timeline and placed it inside the cover of the warranty deed folder. At 9:50 she carried the folders to her car. She stopped at the coffee shop on the corner and bought a second coffee for the drive. The morning was clear, October blue, the kind of sky Atlanta produced a few times a year that made you understand why people stayed here regardless of the summers. She drove through light traffic. She did not play the radio. She thought about nothing in particular, which was a skill her father had also tried to teach her, the ability to let a space be empty for a while, to not fill every available moment with processing, to let things rest before you pick them up again. Raymond's office was in a building on Peachtree that had been there since before she was born. Not the largest building on the block. Not the newest. Raymond preferred it that way. He had once said that clients paid him for preparation, not impressive architecture, and that he had no particular interest in paying for lobby aesthetics at their expense. She parked and took the elevator to the 4th floor. Evelyn looked up when she came in and smiled with the warm recognition of someone who had known you since you were 19. He's ready for you. Raymond Harris was standing when she entered the conference room. He was 63 years old, silver-haired, wearing a dark navy suit that was pressed with the precision of someone who considered presentation a form of respect. He had the build of a man who had been broad-shouldered in his youth and had stayed in reasonable shape from habit rather than vanity. His expression when he saw the folders in her hands shifted in a small but recognizable way, not surprise, but the particular composure of a man confirming what he had already suspected. You brought everything. I thought it was time. He pulled out the chair at the near end of the table. She sat. He sat across from her, at his usual position, the one from which he could reach the credenza behind him without standing. Tell me everything, he said, not dramatically. Not emotionally, chronologically. So she did. She began with August, the stairwell, the half-heard phone call. She described the moving truck and what she had observed and written down. She described Monica Reed accepting the key. She described the conversation in the front yard, the exact words she remembered, the exact enrabed, the neighbors who had been visible, the cameras she had identified. She described going upstairs and removing the folders from the safe. She described leaving without confrontation. Raymond listened. He interrupted twice. What exact words did Anthony use when he told you to leave? She told him. What did Monica say? She told him that too. Did anyone physically prevent you from accessing any part of the house? No. Did anyone threaten you? No. Were there witnesses to the conversation? Yes. She named Brenda Wright, described her position across the street, her background, her history on the block. Raymond wrote Brenda's name down and underlined it. Would you treat them with kindness? When Patricia finished, Raymond leaned back in his chair for a moment, looking at the middle distance above her head in the way he did when he was organizing what he'd heard. Then he reached for the first folder. He opened the warranty deed. Spent 3 minutes reading without comment. Set it beside the trust document and spent 5 minutes reading that, cross-referencing a clause and then returning to it. He moved through the chain of title reports slowly and carefully. He looked at the property tax history, the insurance renewals, the maintenance records. He was quiet for the duration in the particular way of a man who was not quiet by accident but by discipline. He set the last folder down and looked at her. Anthony's name has never appeared in this chain of title. He touched the warranty deed. Not here. He moved his hand to the trust document. Not here. He moved to the title report. Not here. She already knew this. He knew she already knew it. He was saying it because saying it out loud, in this room, was different from knowing it alone. You've maintained every major financial obligation associated with this property since your parents transferred it to the trust. He pointed to the tax records, the insurance, the maintenance contracts. Every significant payment originates from your account or directly from the trust. Yes. Anthony paid utilities during the marriage. Yes, nothing else. Occasionally groceries, general living expenses. Raymond made a note. The law distinguishes between living expenses and ownership expenses. He paused. Significantly. She nodded. He looked at her for a moment. He had known her since she was 19 years old. Would you treat them with kindness? Sat across from her at this same table when she was 24 and her father had died, and again when she was 27 and her mother had gone. Would you treat them with kindness? He had watched her handle both of those losses with a composure that he had found remarkable in someone that young, not because grief did not move her, but because she would not let grief make her careless. I'm going to ask you something, he said. Go ahead. What do you want from this? She had thought about this question, had been thinking about it since August in a quiet way, in the parts of her mind she kept separate from the notebook and the documents and the practical management of what was coming. I want the house returned to me. Nothing else. Raymond studied her. Not compensation. Not damages. Not beyond what's legally appropriate. If the court determines something is owed, I'll leave that to the court. But I'm not in this for money. She looked at the warranty deed. I'm in this because that house belonged to my parents. And then it belonged to me. And it still does. He made another note. There's a distinction, court's notice, he said carefully, between plaintiffs seeking restoration and plaintiffs seeking retaliation. The distinction is visible in what they ask for, and in how they conduct themselves throughout the process. She understood what he was telling her. I've never raised my voice at him, she said. Not once. In 8 years. Raymond looked at her over the rim of his reading glasses. I believe you. He picked up his pen again. And so will a judge. He walked her through the next steps with the measured precision she had come to expect from him. Over the years, each stage named, each purpose explained, each decision point identified. First, updated certified copies directly from the Fulton County Recorder to establish that nothing had changed as of this week. Second, a current title report to match. Third, a formal demand letter sent certified mail with return receipt requested, notifying Anthony Wilson that he was occupying property held by the Johnson Family Trust and demanding he immediately cease excluding the legal owner from the residence. Fourth, if no adequate response in 10 business days, they would file. One more thing, he said before closing the last folder. She waited. Do you want him warned before we send the demand letter? She thought about that. Would you treat them with kindness? Thought about Anthony standing in the front doorway with the easy smile. Thought about Monica looking at the house with proprietary calm. Thought about the cream-colored leather chair coming through her mother's front door. If he already believes the house is his, she said, warning him won't change what he believes. Raymond watched her. It may, she continued, encourage him to do things he might not otherwise do, things that would become relevant later. Raymond was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. Not a large smile. The small, precise smile of a man who has spent 40 years in rooms like this one and recognizes when someone is thinking exactly the right way about exactly the right thing. I thought you might say something like that, he said. He closed the folders, stacked them with care, stood. She stood too, picked up her notebook and her purse. Would you treat them with kindness? Looked around conference room at the walnut table, the framed county maps, the locked credenza, the room where her parents had sat and made the decisions that were now protecting her. 30 years later, in ways they had not entirely predicted, but had somehow managed to plan for anyway. My father would have liked you, she said. Raymond considered this. I liked him. He picked up the folders and moved toward his inner office. He was the kind of man who made good decisions before the crisis arrived. She followed him to the door. "We'll have the certified copies within 48 hours, he said. "The demand letter will be ready by end of week." And then? He looked at her with the calm of someone who had done this for a very long time and knew how it ended when the preparation was this thorough. "Then we let them continue believing something the county recorder has never agreed with." She drove back to the hotel in the same clear October morning she had driven through an hour before. Same sky, same traffic, same city, indifferent and continuous. She parked and took the elevator up and let herself into the room and set the folders on the desk and stood at the window for a moment looking west toward the part of Atlanta where her street was, where her house was. Would you treat them with kindness? Where the sycamore her father had planted was currently dropping its first gold leaves onto the front lawn that she had mowed herself most of the summers she had lived there. She opened the notebook, wrote the date and the time. Wrote, "Met with RH documents confirmed. Demand letter to be prepared. Certified county copies requested. No action needed from me today." Then, below that, a single line that was not a fact or an observation, but something closer to the truth of where she actually was. "He built this. He built it so I would always have somewhere to come back to." She closed the notebook. Outside, the morning was still clear, still blue, still moving forward in the way mornings do, without asking permission, without waiting for anyone to be ready. Patricia was ready. She had been ready for a long time. The demand letter went out on a Thursday. Raymond had it ready in 3 days, which was faster than he had promised, because the certified copies from the Fulton County Recorder had come back in 46 hours instead of 48, and because Raymond Harris, when he had everything he needed, did not believe in unnecessary waiting. Patricia sat in the conference room one more time while he walked her through every paragraph. The language was clean, professional, no threat in it that the law did not specifically authorize, no emotion that a judge would have to sort through. Just the facts, arranged in the order a court would recognize. The Johnson family trust held title. Patricia Johnson was sole beneficiary. Anthony Wilson had no recorded ownership interest, and his current conduct, specifically his exclusion of the legal owner from the property, was not legally supportable and must immediately cease. Raymond had also included a line about evidence preservation. "Do not remove, destroy, alter, or transfer any property fixture, document, recording, or improvement from the premises." It was standard language. It was also, Raymond observed, the kind of language that became extremely useful later, when parties ignored it. He sent the letter via certified mail with return receipt requested, and also retained a licensed process server on standby in case the certified delivery was refused or complicated. Patricia watched him add the process server's number to the file with the calm efficiency of someone laying kindling before the temperature dropped. She went back to the hotel and waited, not passively. Waiting, for Patricia, had never been empty time. She had a full caseload at the commercial property management firm where she worked. Clients called. Leases needed review. A dispute over a parking easement on a Buckhead property required 3 separate conversations with 2 different attorneys and a surveyor before anyone agreed on anything. She worked at the hotel desk every morning and went into the office Tuesday through Thursday. She ate regularly. She slept adequately. She kept the notebook current. What she did not do was go back to the street. Not would you treat them with kindness. Not because she was forbidden. The demand letter made clear she had every legal right to access the property, but because walking up to that front door and finding it locked with a key she no longer had would not help her. It would only give her feelings she was not ready to spend time managing. Strategy first. Everything else in its proper sequence. On Monday, 6 days after the letter was sent, the tracking information updated, delivered, signed for. She clicked through to the delivery confirmation and saw the signature on the screen. Anthony Wilson, 11:43 in the morning. She forwarded the confirmation to Raymond. He called her back within the hour. He signed for it personally. Yes, that matters. Raymond paused in the way he paused when he was making a note. It removes the possibility of a later claim that he was unaware of the dispute. She already knew that, but she appreciated him saying it. There was something about having Raymond say things that she already knew, calmly, specifically, in the language of established fact that made them feel more real, more durable, like pressing a seal into wax while it was still warm. She asked the obvious question. Do you think he'll respond? Raymond was quiet for a moment. Not uncertain quiet. Thinking quiet. No, he said. I think he'll decide the letter is a scare tactic, and that ignoring it is the stronger position. And is ignoring it the stronger position? For someone who has documentation supporting his ownership claim, ignoring a demand letter could be argued as confident. For someone who has no documentation at all, Raymond left the sentence where it landed. She understood. We let him ignore it, she said. We let him ignore it, Raymond agreed. And we watch what he does while he's ignoring it. What Anthony did while ignoring it was, from a legal standpoint, remarkable. Patricia did not know all of it in real time. Some she would learn later, through discovery, through documents, through the particular satisfaction of watching a paper trail assemble itself without anyone having to arrange it. But some treat them with kindness. But some she knew almost immediately, because the house's security system was still faithfully uploading to the cloud account she had registered 3 years ago, and she was still the registered account holder, and Anthony had changed the Wi-Fi password, but had not thought to change the account credentials. Every morning she opened the security dashboard on her laptop and reviewed the previous day's footage. She did not watch it dramatically. She watched it the way you review HVAC maintenance logs or insurance renewal dates. Methodically. For relevant information, she made notes. She clipped specific timestamps. She forwarded compressed file links to Raymond's assistant with a short email subject line, footage, followed by the date. Raymond's assistant filed them and acknowledged receipt. The footage from the third day after the demand letter showed a contractor's truck arriving at 8 in the morning. The truck belonged to a company called Moore Brothers Build, which Patricia recognized because she had used them once to replace a section of the back fence. 2 men and a project manager went through the front door. They were inside for nearly 2 hours. When they left, the project manager was carrying a measuring tape and a yellow legal pad. Kitchen consultation. She wrote it in the notebook. The footage from the 6th day showed Anthony and Monica leaving the house together at 7:40 in the morning. Together, as in his car, her in the passenger seat. Patricia looked at that clip for an extra moment, not because it surprised her, but because there was something about seeing it that made the abstract specific, in a way she had not entirely prepared for. She wrote departed together, AW, vehicle 7:40 a.m., and moved on. The footage from the 8th day was more interesting. A locksmith van, Parker Lock and Key, the company name visible on the driver's door. The locksmith went to the front door first, then the side door, then the garage entrance, then the rear patio door. He was there for 2 hours and 20 minutes. When he left, Anthony was at the front door testing the new hardware. He opened and closed it 3 times. Patricia looked at the timestamp. 6 days after Anthony had signed for the demand letter. 6 days after he had been formally notified in writing that the property was legally owned by the Johnson Family Trust and that his conduct of excluding the legal owner was not supportable. He had responded to that notification by changing every lock on the house. She made a call to Parker Lock and Key the following morning. Not pretending to be anything she was not. She identified herself by name, explained that she was the property owner of record at the Oak Street address. Would you treat them with kindness? And asked whether they could confirm the service date and the customer name on the invoice for the lock replacement work performed the previous week. The woman on the phone checked the system and said the invoice was in the name of Anthony Wilson, residential customer, full exterior re-key, 4 entry points. Patricia thanked her, ended the call, and noted it in the notebook. Date of locksmith service. Company name. Customer name on invoice, 4 entry points. 6 days post-demand letter. She texted Raymond the note verbatim. His response came back in 4 minutes, request invoice copy via discovery. Noted. Then Anthony sent the text message. It came through on a Tuesday evening at 9:42. She was at the hotel desk reviewing a lease addendum for a client when her phone lit up. She finished the sentence she was reading before she picked it up. The message was brief. Don't come back. You no longer have access here. She read it twice, took a screenshot, saved the screenshot in 2 locations, the cloud backup and a separate encrypted folder on her laptop. Then she opened the email app and forwarded both copies to Raymond with a single line of context. Received 9:42 p.m. Tuesday. No response sent. Then she opened the notebook. Date, time. Content quote exactly. Action taken. No response sent. She capped the pen. Sat for a moment at the desk with the apartment hotel quiet around her. The city outside the window doing its usual nighttime thing. She thought about the text message. The bluntness of it. Don't come back. You no longer have access here. 8 words. No punctuation on the first sentence. Like an afterthought. Like telling someone not to park in a certain spot. Like telling someone they had no claim on a piece of ground they had been standing on for their entire life. Her mother had taught her to cook in that kitchen. Not formally, not in the way people sign up for classes, but in the gradual accumulated way of Saturday mornings and holiday preparations and rainy afternoons when there was nothing else to do, and Linda Brown would say, "Come stand here and watch what I'm doing with my hands." That was how she had learned everything her mother knew. By standing close and watching and eventually doing while being watched. The kitchen had always been where that happened. The window above the sink that faced the backyard. The specific angle of the afternoon light. She was not going to let herself sit with that image for too long. She closed the notebook, finished reviewing the lease addendum, sent it back to the client with her notes, drank a glass of water, went to bed. Raymond called the following morning. "I got your message, yes. That text message is significant." He was already in case attorney mode, which meant he had been thinking about it since he received the forward. He admitted to excluding you, in writing, with a timestamp. After receiving the demand letter, she had already understood this. But again, Raymond saying it in the specific cadence of legal consequence made it feel more fully real. "Excellent," she said, and then caught herself, because excellent was an odd word for a text message from her estranged husband, telling her she no longer had access to her own home. "I know that's a strange thing to say. Not in this office," Raymond replied, and she could hear, very slightly, the particular warmth that lived underneath his professional composure. "In this office, evidence is evidence, and good evidence deserves the word." Later that morning she drove by the house. Not to stop, not to confront anyone. She drove down Oak Street, at the regular residential speed, 25 miles per hour, and looked at the house as she passed. What she saw took 3 seconds. New locks on the front door, visible because the hardware was shinier than the old set, and parked in the driveway, beside Anthony's car, a vehicle she did not recognize, a silver sedan that had a Moore Brothers Build magnetic sign on the driver's door. The contractor was already back. She drove to the end of the block, turned, drove back past the house, and then headed toward Peachtree. She called Raymond's office on the way, described what she had seen. Renovation consultations apparently ongoing. Moore Brothers Build, second visit. Raymond said, if he executes a renovation contract after receiving the demand letter, and does so by representing himself as the property owner, that becomes misrepresentation in a legal context, potentially significant. I'll watch the footage. Please do. The footage, treat them with kindness. The footage from that afternoon manager, a man named Kevin Woon. Moore, she would later learn, who had worked with Anthony before on a commercial project, emerging from the house with a full measuring booklet and a folder of what appeared to be material samples. He loaded them into his truck with the businesslike efficiency of someone who had gotten what he needed and was ready to move to the next step. 3 days later, Kevin Moore emailed Anthony a draft renovation proposal. Patricia would not see this email until discovery, but when she did, it would contain a line on the first page. Property owner, Anthony Wilson. Anthony had approved the proposal the same day he received it, electronically, with a timestamp, 11 after the demand letter. Meanwhile, Brenda Wright called on a Wednesday morning. Patricia answered on the second ring. Brenda apologized for bothering her, which was a formality because Brenda Wright did not actually believe she was bothering anyone when she had useful information to convey. She simply thought it was polite to begin that way. "I wanted you to know," Brenda began, "that there was a gathering at your house this past Saturday." Patricia picked up the notebook. "What time did it start?" A small sound on the line, appreciation, maybe, or recognition. "Around 3 in the afternoon, I counted 6 vehicles. I recognized 2 of them as neighbors. The others were unknown to me. Did you hear anything?" "I was in my front yard from about 4 to 4:45. Brenda's voice had the measured quality of a woman accustomed to giving testimony at parent-teacher conferences, which was not entirely different from giving testimony in other contexts. "I heard Anthony tell someone, I believe it was 2 men near the porch, that he kept the house. Those were his exact words." Patricia wrote them down. "His words exactly. Do you remember what time that was?" 4:15. "I was checking my watch because I had something on the stove at 4:30. Who else was there? Did you recognize anyone?" "One man I didn't know. Younger, business casual. And Victor Bryant, I've seen him at neighborhood events. I believe he works with Anthony." Victor Bryant. Patricia knew who he was. Finance director at Anthony's company. A careful, full, observant man who had been at the block party in August and who had stood slightly apart from the group when Anthony had done his usual performance of confident ownership. The kind of man who listened more than he talked. "Thank you, Brenda. There's one more thing." Brenda paused the way someone pauses when they are deciding how to say the last part. "He also said, to those same 2 men, that everything was documented." His word, documented. Patricia wrote that too, and underlined it, because the particular irony of Anthony Wilson telling people that everything was documented when the documentation that actually existed said the exact opposite of everything he was claiming was the kind of detail that a judge would notice and remember and find instructive about the gap between a man's confidence and his actual relationship with the record. She called Raymond and relayed the conversation. "Mrs. Wright is willing to provide an affidavit?" "I believe she is. I'd like to set that up this week." Raymond made a note. Independent witnesses who did not coordinate with each other but described the same pattern courts find that compelling. 2 days after the party, the discovery process formally began. Patricia had known it was coming. Raymond had explained the timeline at their last meeting, walking her through each stage with the same methodical clarity he applied to everything. She had understood, intellectually, that this was the phase where both parties would be required to exchange relevant documentation. What she had not fully anticipated was how much Anthony would produce. Not because he had documentation supporting his position. He didn't, but because he had been busy. The boxes of discovery materials from Anthony's side contained hundreds of pages. Credit card statements, bank transfers, purchase receipts for furniture, appliances, light fixtures, cabinet hardware, paint. A contract with Moore Brothers bill dated 11 days after the demand letter, with Anthony Wilson listed as property owner on the first page and his electronic signature on the last. A counter-contract for specialty kitchen appliances, professional-grade refrigerator, commercial range, double oven, all delivered to the Oak Street address. A detailed renovation proposal with room-by-room specifications. Photographs of the kitchen mid-renovation. Photographs of the new living room furniture arranged. And then the emails. Raymond's assistant had organized them chronologically. There were hundreds, most of them irrelevant work correspondence, scheduling, vendor communication. But there were also the personal ones, the ones between Anthony and Monica. Raymond had flagged 7 of them. Patricia sat in the conference room on a Thursday afternoon and read through all 7. Most of them were what she expected, the early ones from before the truck arrived, the planning ones. Then there was the one from 8 days after the demand letter. Monica had written, "I can't believe we'll finally have our own house." Simple enough. Optimistic. The kind of thing people write when they are caught up in the feeling of something new. Anthony had replied 4 minutes later, "Everything is already mine. Don't worry." Patricia read that reply twice. Not because she was surprised by it. Because treat them with kindness. With the precise attention she brought to everything she filed away, that those words had been written 11 days after Anthony had signed for the demand letter. 80 days after that demand letter had formally notified him in plain legal language that the Johnson family trust held title, and that his exclusion of the beneficial owner was not supported by the record. Everything is already mine. Don't worry. She set the printout down. Raymond was watching her. That email was sent after the demand letter. I see that. He's repeating the ownership claim in writing, to a third party, after being formally notified in writing that the claim has no recorded basis. She understood what Raymond was building. Not a case built on one dramatic piece of evidence. A case built on pattern, on repetition, on the particular legal significance of continuing to assert a false position after being given specific written notice that it was false. Courts did not look kindly on that. Courts understood mistake. Courts understood confusion. Courts were considerably less patient with a man who had been told clearly what the documents said and had responded by redoubling confidence in a position the documents did not support. She looked at the renovation contract. Anthony Wilson, property owner, signed 11 days after the demand letter, then the locksmith invoice, 6 days after, then the text message, 8 days after, don't come back, then the email, 8 days after, everything is already mine, then the party, 11 days after, he told people he kept the house, then the renovation contract 11 days after, property owner, Anthony Wilson. The pattern was not subtle. It was not ambiguous. It was the documented record of a man who had been told something he did not want to believe, and had responded by behaving as if the telling had never happened. Raymond gathered the flagged emails into a separate stack. I'll request additional documents related to the renovation timeline. Kevin Moore may receive a discovery request as well. Can you do that? The renovation was performed on a property in dispute, after notice was served. The contractor is a material witness to the conduct of the party claiming ownership. Raymond looked at her over his glasses. Yes, I can do that. She left the conference room 2 hours later with a fuller understanding of something she had only partially grasped before. That in legal disputes involving property and documented title, the evidence did not end at the moment the dispute became visible. It continued generating itself, produced by the very conduct of the people who believed they were winning. Every contract Anthony signed was a timestamp. Every email he sent was a timestamp. Every lock he changed, every renovation he approved, every party he threw, and every statement he made about keeping the house, all of it was a timestamp, and all of it was attached to a date that came after the demand letter, and all of it was now in a file in Raymond's office that was organized by category and cross-referenced by date. She drove back to the hotel, stopped at the coffee place on the corner out of habit. Would you treat them with kindness? Ordered the thing she always ordered, sat at the window table for 15 minutes watching Atlanta traffic redistribute itself around a signal that had been malfunctioning for a week. Would you treat them with kindness? A delivery driver on a bicycle threaded through the stopped cars with the practiced ease of someone who had mapped every gap in the city's patterns. She thought about Anthony at the party. She thought, telling 2 men in business casual that everything was documented. She thought about the way confidence sounds when it is built on something solid versus the way it sounds when it is built on nothing. She had spent 8 years living with that sound. She had grown up listening to the other kind, her father's particular quiet assurance, which was the sound of a man who knew exactly what he owned and what it was worth, because he had the receipts to prove it. Not metaphorically, actually. In a fireproof box under the bed, labeled with her mother's handwriting. She thought about how different those 2 sounds were, and how the difference was not always audible at first. Back at the hotel, the afternoon light was coming through the west window, at the angle she had gotten used to over the past weeks. She opened the notebook, made a full entry, discovery documents reviewed with RH. Renovation contract confirmed as executed 11 days post-demand letter. Emails flagged. Moore Brothers contact to be requested. Pattern documented across 7 distinct items. She wrote the dates in a list. Each one a day count from the demand letter receipt. Then she turned to a clean page. She had a habit, which Raymond had noted with approval the first time she mentioned it, of preparing what she privately called a second layer. After the factual entry, on a separate page, she would write a short paragraph, 3 to 5 sentences describing what the facts collectively meant. Not for the notebook itself, which was evidence, for herself. To stay oriented inside the shape of what was happening, rather than just the individual events of it. She wrote, "The pattern shows a man who received a formal legal notice and experienced it as a personal challenge rather than a legal reality. Each action after the demand letter, the locks, the renovation contract, the text message, the email, the party represents the same response to that challenge. Doubling down. The response is psychologically understandable and legally consequential. He is not confused. He is committed to a version of events that the county recorder has never agreed with." She looked at what she had written, added one more sentence. "That commitment will be visible in the record, and the record does not have feelings about what it shows." She closed the notebook. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Raymond called Sunday evening to go through the plan one more time. He was not nervous. Raymond Harris did not do nervous, but he was precise in the way he became when something significant was close. He told her what to bring. Would you treat them with kindness? He told her what to wear, which was his particular way of saying that impressions mattered, and that restraint communicated more than display in a courtroom. He told her what to say if addressed directly by the judge, which was to answer only what was asked, and to stop the moment the answer was complete. "Do not elaborate," he said. "I know. I mean specifically with Judge Sandra Anderson. She notices elaboration. She interprets it as a lack of confidence in the answer itself." Patricia had looked up Judge Anderson after Raymond first mentioned her name. 15 years on the bench, former civil litigation attorney. Known in Atlanta legal circles for a particular style of court management, focused, unhurried, intolerant of unsupported claims. Her reputation among opposing counsels was that she read every filing herself and never asked a question she did not already know the answer to. Good, Patricia had thought when she read that. That was exactly the judge she wanted. Monday night she sat at the hotel desk and looked at the folders one more time. Not to memorize them, she already knew every page. To feel their weight, the physical reality of all those documents, all those dates, all those signatures and seals and recording numbers. Her parents had built this, not in a single moment, over years. Over decisions made at kitchen tables and in attorneys' offices and at the county recorder's window, decisions made by two people who did not have extraordinary resources, but who had enough discipline to protect what they built with something more durable than confidence. She thought about her father's hands, the way he held documents. Both hands, flat on the table, like he was pressing them into permanence. Would you treat them with kindness? The way he read slowly, mouthing some of the harder phrases, not because he struggled with language, but because he believed important things deserved the time it took to say them properly. He had told her once, when she was maybe 17 and annoyed at the length of some form she had to fill out for a school thing, that paperwork was just a conversation that agreed to be permanent. She had rolled her eyes. She had not forgotten it. She slept. And across the city, in the house on Oak Street, Anthony Wilson was not sleeping. Or maybe he was. She did not know. Would you treat them with kindness? But she knew because the security footage from Sunday evening showed the lights in the master bedroom, and then the living room, then the kitchen in that order, the particular them with kindness. The particular of a person moving through a house at midnight because something would not let them stay still, that something in the past week had begun to shift inside whatever certainty he had been carrying. Daniel Brooks had filed his appearance as Anthony's legal representative the previous Thursday. Raymond had sent her the notification. Patricia had looked at it and then looked at the security footage from that same evening, which showed Anthony's car arriving home later than usual, and Anthony sitting in the driveway for 8 full minutes before he went inside. 8 minutes. She had not timed it on purpose. The footage had timestamps automatically. She had simply noticed. She did not know what had been said in Daniel Brooks's office that day. She would learn some of it later, in fragments through discovery, in fragments through the particular silences in Anthony's later behavior. that suggested certain conversations had gone differently than he had expected. But you treat them with kindness. But she suspected with the particular instinct of someone who had watched a person's patterns for 8 years. Tuesday's preliminary hearing was going to be the first time Anthony Wilson heard something he genuinely had not prepared for. Not because Daniel Brooks was incompetent, because there was nothing to prepare him for that could change what the county recorder had on file. Monday passed. She went to the office in the morning, finished 2 lease reviews, attended a call about a commercial property assessment. She ate lunch at her desk. She drove back to the hotel in the early afternoon and ironed the navy suit she had hung in the closet on the day she checked in. She checked the folders one more time. She charged her phone. She set the alarm. Would you treat them with kindness? At 9:15 the following morning she would be sitting across the aisle from Anthony Wilson in a Fulton County courtroom, and Judge Sandra Anderson would be looking at the documents, and the documents would say what they had always said, and there would be, for the first time in this entire process, no way for Anthony to avoid hearing it from a source he could not dismiss. She turned off the desk lamp. Outside, the city was doing its usual Tuesday night routine. Traffic thinning toward midnight. Somewhere below, the same couple who always walked their dog past the hotel at this hour were walking their dog past the hotel, their voices low and familiar, the dog pausing at every lamppost with the dedicated optimism of an animal for whom the entire world was still worth investigating. Patricia lay in the dark and thought about nothing specific, which was, for her, a kind of preparation all its own. Because what was coming tomorrow required less thinking and more presence, less strategy and more stillness. Raymond would do the speaking. The documents would do the proving. She would do the one thing she had always been best at in the situations that mattered most. She would stay exactly where she was, and she would wait for the record to speak. The courtroom was smaller than people imagined when they thought about justice. No marble columns, no dramatic lighting, wood-paneled walls the color of old honey, state flags on either side of the bench, rows of plain benches behind the bar. The kind of room that had witnessed so many ordinary devastations over so many ordinary years that it had stopped performing gravity and simply contained it. Patricia arrived 23 minutes early. She wore the navy suit she had ironed Monday evening, pearl earrings that had been her mother's, hair pulled back cleanly. Nothing about her appearance was accidental, and nothing about it was theatrical. Raymond had told her once that judges read people before they read documents, and that the first thing a judge read was whether someone understood where they were. She understood where she was. Raymond was already in the hallway outside courtroom 4B when she came off the elevator. He was carrying 2 leather binders and reviewing something on a yellow legal pad, with the focused attention of a man going over a speech he had already memorized but believed was worth checking once more. His associate, a young woman named Elaine, who had joined Raymond's firm the previous year, stood beside him with a rolling case containing the supplemental exhibits. Raymond looked up when he heard Patricia's footsteps. He studied her for a half-second. Whatever he saw satisfied him. He said simply, "Good morning. Good morning. How did you sleep?" Adequately. He almost smiled. "That's enough." He turned back to the legal pad. "Remember, answer what's asked. Stop when the answer is complete. Judge Anderson finds elaboration instructive in the wrong direction. You told me Sunday. I'm telling you again." He folded the legal pad under his arm, because courtrooms have a way of making people want to explain themselves. And explanation, when the documents already explain everything, only introduces room for doubt. She understood. Across the hallway, Anthony arrived at 9:04 with Daniel Brooks beside him. Anthony wore a charcoal suit. Fitted. Expensive. The kind of suit a man wears when he wants to look like someone who does not need to be nervous. He was carrying nothing. Daniel was carrying a briefcase that looked thinner than Raymond's binders, which Patricia noticed without making anything of it except the notation that it was thin. Monica was not there. Patricia had half expected her to be. She was not. Anthony came in with Daniel and a colleague Patricia did not recognize, and they went directly to the bench area outside the courtroom without looking across the hallway. Or rather, Anthony did not look. Daniel looked, briefly. with the professional assessment of someone cataloging the opposing position, and then looked away. Brenda Wright arrived at 9:12. She had been granted observer status, which Raymond had arranged. She wore a deep burgundy dress and low heels, and the particular composed expression of a woman who had spent 4 decades in institutional settings and knew that composure was its own form of testimony. She found a seat in the gallery without ceremony. She nodded once at Patricia. Patricia returned it. The clerk called the case at 9 o'clock exactly. Judge Sandra Anderson entered and everyone stood and then sat. She was in her early 50s. Brown skin, reading glasses pushed up on her head, posture that communicated nothing except that she had been here many times before and had yet to hear anything that surprised her. She opened the case file and spent 90 seconds reading, without acknowledging either attorney. Then she looked up. "Good morning," addressed to both sides equally. Raymond, "Good morning, Your Honor." Daniel, "Good morning, Your Honor." She looked at the docket. "This matter concerns disputed possession and ownership of residential property in Fulton County." She looked at Raymond. "Counsel, are we addressing preliminary matters today, or is both sides' preference to proceed directly to the substantive issues?" Raymond stood. "Your Honor, we're requesting temporary relief restoring my client's access to the property and an order preserving all evidence while litigation continues. We believe the certified record is sufficient to support both requests at this stage." Judge Anderson looked at Daniel. Daniel stood carefully. "Your Honor, we respectfully request the court allow additional time for complete review of certain trust documents before any access order is entered." Raymond remained standing. Judge Anderson looked at him. "Counsel, Raymond, Your Honor, those documents have been in the Fulton County public record for over 15 years. My client produced certified copies at the outset of this matter. The time for review has existed since the demand letter was served 5 weeks ago." Judge Anderson made a note. She looked at Daniel. "Is there a dispute regarding the authenticity of the certified records produced by plaintiff?" Daniel chose his next words with visible care. "Not at this time, Your Honor." Anthony shifted slightly at the table. It was a small movement. The kind a man makes when he hears something he did not expect to hear from his own attorney. Raymond moved to the podium. He handed a folder to the clerk, who distributed copies to the bench and to opposing counsel. The documents were already in evidence. They were simply being formally introduced to the record in the sequence Raymond had chosen. Warranty deed first. Trust document second. Chain of title third. Property tax history fourth. Insurance renewals fifth. Judge Anderson reviewed each one. She did not rush. She did not look up at either party during the review. "Would you treat them with kindness?" She read the warranty deed with the focused attention of someone who had seen thousands of them and knew exactly where the relevant language lived on the page. She read the trust document more slowly. She read the title report and then went back to the warranty deed and compared a specific passage before setting both down. It took 7 minutes. The courtroom was quiet in the way courtrooms are quiet when something is actually happening. The title report identifies the Johnson Family Trust as owner of record. Judge Anderson addressed this to no one in particular, but her eyes were on Daniel. "The beneficiary is listed as Patricia Johnson. Is that correct?" "Daniel, that is what the report states, Your Honor." "Does your client possess any recorded deed transferring an ownership interest to himself?" A pause. "No, Your Honor." "Any recorded conveyance of any kind?" "No." "Any amendment to the trust naming him as a beneficiary or co-beneficiary?" "No, Your Honor." Judge Anderson wrote something. She did not look at Anthony. She did not need to. Anthony was looking at the table in front of him, with the expression of a man watching a head built entirely in his head encounter a physical reality that declined to accommodate it. Raymond spoke from the podium. "Your Honor, my client has also been excluded from the property through unilateral replacement of all exterior locks, which occurred 6 days after service of the demand letter." Judge Anderson looked up. "Evidence of that?" Raymond handed another folder to the clerk. Inside, the Parker lock and key invoice with Anthony Wilson's name as customer. The cloud security footage timestamp showing the locksmith van's arrival and departure. The text message screenshot with its 9:42 p.m. timestamp and its 8 words. Don't come back. You no longer have access here. Judge Anderson read the text message. She read it again. Then she looked directly at Anthony for the first time. Mr. Wilson, her voice was the same caliber as it had been for everything else. Not elevated, not cold, simply exact. Did you send this message to Patricia Johnson? Anthony stood. His posture was still controlled. His voice, when he found it, was still composed. Yes, Your Honor. On what date was this sent? He looked at the exhibit the clerk had provided. Read the date. Which was how many days after you received the demand letter? He looked at the date on the demand letter in the same exhibit packet. Did the arithmetic. Looked up. 8 days. Judge Anderson wrote. So you were aware there was a formal legal notice disputing your ownership of this property. I believed the property was mine, Your Honor. I didn't ask what you believed. The sentence was not sharp, just precise. I asked whether you were aware a formal notice had been served. A pause that lasted 2 seconds too long. Yes, and 8 days after that notice, you sent a text message to the person who had served that notice, informing her she no longer had access to the property. No question mark at the end of that sentence. Anthony understood the distinction. Yes, Your Honor. You may sit. Raymond waited until Anthony was fully seated. Then he said, Your Honor, we're not asking the court to resolve the entire dispute today. We are asking only that the record be protected and that my client not remain excluded from property she has presented certified evidence of owning. Judge Anderson looked at both sides for a moment. She reviewed the documents one more time, a shorter pass, touching each one. Then she spoke. The court will not issue final findings today. She paused. Every chair in the room seemed to stop moving. However, the court finds sufficient preliminary evidence establishing serious and substantial questions regarding the basis for the current occupancy arrangement. She continued without pausing for effect, because Judge Sandra Anderson did not traffic in effect. She trafficked in clarity. The parties are ordered to preserve all physical and electronic evidence related to this property. No renovation work is to proceed. No fixtures are to be altered or removed. No documents are to be destroyed. No surveillance recordings are to be modified or deleted. Raymond nodded. Daniel nodded. Judge Anderson looked at Anthony one more time. The court strongly advises all parties to review their obligations under this order carefully and to comply fully. Failure to comply will be addressed. Another pause. Not for drama. For the word to land in the room the way it was intended to land. Accordingly, the hearing was over in 38 minutes. Outside the courtroom, Raymond walked beside Patricia toward the elevator without rushing. When they were clear of the immediate area, he said, quietly. She accepted the documents. She questioned the basis for the occupancy. She ordered evidence preservation. He pressed the elevator button. The preliminary hearing did what it needed to do. Patricia felt something in her chest that was not triumph and not relief, but something between them. A kind of settling. Like a structure finding its foundation after a long period of vibration. What happens now? Discovery continues. We move toward trial. Raymond looked at her. And unless Daniel Brooks manages to locate documentation that doesn't exist, the trial will follow the same logic the preliminary hearing did. In the elevator, she thought about Anthony's face when Daniel had said not at this time regarding the disputed records. Not the anger on it. The bewilderment. The specific look of a man who had been absolutely certain of something and had just watched his own attorney decline to support that certainty in front of a judge. She thought about the 8-minute gap 5 weeks ago when Anthony had sat in his car in the driveway before going inside. She thought, he knows now, not believes, knows. The trial was set for 5 weeks out. Those 5 weeks had their own texture. Patricia continued working. Would you treat them with kindness? Filling the notebook with observations that were now less frequent because the legal process had taken over most of the information gathering. Raymond filed additional discovery requests. Kevin Moore responded to a subpoena and provided his project file, which contained, among other things, a signed contract bearing Anthony Wilson's name as property owner and a handwritten note from their initial consultation where Kevin had written, in his own hand, customer confirms sole ownership. Kevin Moore was none. Kevin Moore was not a villain. He was a contractor who had asked a standard question and received an unequivocal answer from a client who had no legal basis for giving it. He had recorded the answer because that was his professional habit. Would you treat them with kindness? He would later be cooperative and straightforward on the stand in the way that people are cooperative and straightforward when they have no particular stake in the outcome and simply want to tell what they observed. Would you treat them with kindness? Anthony's depositioned on a Wednesday in Raymond's conference room. Patricia was not in the room for the deposition itself. Would you treat them with kindness? But Raymond debriefed her afterward with the organized efficiency of someone who had taken many depositions and knew which moments had mattered. Would you treat them with kindness? Anthony had maintained throughout that he had genuinely believed he held ownership rights based on the marriage, the length of his residence, and what he described as his financial contributions to the household. He had not contradicted himself on any of the major facts. He had not lied. He had simply continued, under oath, to describe a legal reality that the county recorder had never recognized. Daniel had tried. Raymond said this without particular warmth, but with the fairness of someone who believed in crediting people for effort. He had constructed the most viable available argument, which was that Anthony had been led by a reasonable misunderstanding born from 8 years of cohabitation and the assumption that marital property distributed itself automatically. It was not a weak argument in abstract. It was a weak argument in the specific context of this property, this trust structure, this documented financial history, and this series of actions taken after the demand letter was served. Reasonable misunderstanding, Raymond observed dryly, you treat them with kindness, had a harder time surviving in a record that showed the misunderstood party continuing to sign renovation contracts and change locks after being formally informed of the misunderstanding. The trial date arrived on a morning that had gone cold overnight for the first time that season. Patricia, dressed in the same navy suit, because she was not superstitious but she was methodical, and the navy suit had worked. She ate breakfast. She drove to the courthouse. She met Raymond outside courtroom 4B at 8:45. Anthony arrived with Daniel at 8:52. He looked tired in a way that was different from the preliminary hearing. Not defeated, not broken, but like a man who had spent 5 weeks carrying something heavy and had not found a way to set it down. He had stopped looking quite as much like a man who was certain the outcome was already decided. Monica was not there this time either. The trial courtroom was the same room. Judge Anderson was the same judge. The record was the same record, only larger now, supplemented by 5 weeks of discovery and deposition and exhibit preparation. Raymond's rolling case was considerably heavier than it had been at the preliminary hearing. He and Elaine had organized everything in the sequence he intended to present it, and each binder was labeled and cross-referenced in the manner of someone who believed that clarity was its own argument. Raymond's opening was 14 minutes. He did not raise his voice once. Would you treat them with kindness? He laid out the timeline from the establishment of the Johnson Family Trust through Thomas and Linda's deaths, through Patricia's period of sole stewardship, through the 8 years of the marriage, and then through the 5 weeks of the dispute. He presented it in the flat declarative language of someone reading coordinates. No characterization of Anthony as a villain. No appeal to the court's sympathy for Patricia. Just the shape of what had happened, in the order it had happened, with the documents available to confirm each point. He concluded, this case is not about the end of a marriage. It is not about who deserves sympathy. It is about whether recorded ownership may be replaced by repeated assertion. The documents in this record have never suggested that it can. He sat down. Daniel's opening tried to accomplish what it needed to accomplish, which was to establish that Anthony's belief had been genuine and his contribution to the household real. He did not claim the documents were wrong. He argued that the human context of 8 years of marriage had created a reasonable, if legally imprecise, understanding. Patricia listened to him carefully. It was a fair argument for the situation he was in. But the situation he was in was defined by documents that said one thing and a client who had done the opposite of what a genuinely confused person would do after receiving formal notice of a legal dispute. Kevin Moore testified, first after the record's custodian from the Fulton County Recorder's Office had confirmed the document's authenticity. Kevin was direct and factual in the way of a man who was not there to cause harm and was not there to protect anyone, and simply wanted to say what had happened. He confirmed the consultation date. He confirmed the renovation contract. He confirmed that Anthony Wilson had identified himself as the sole property owner. He confirmed his own handwritten note from the consultation. Daniel's cross-examination asked whether Kevin had independently verified ownership. He had not. He had relied on what his client told him. Daniel thanked him. Kevin stepped down. The locksmith from Parker Lock and Key was similarly direct. He identified the invoice, confirmed the service date, confirmed Anthony Wilson as the customer, confirmed the full exterior rekey of 4 entry points, confirmed the payment. Daniel asked whether the locksmith had been informed there was a legal dispute at the time of service. The locksmith said no one had mentioned it. Daniel thanked him. He stepped down. Brenda Wright took the stand with the unhurried composure of a woman who had been doing important things in front of rooms full of people for most of her professional life. Raymond walked her through the events of the day the truck arrived. She described what she had seen. The truck, the key transfer, Patricia's arrival, the conversation in the front yard, Patricia's departure. She described the Saturday gathering, the time, the words she had written down. Raymond asked, "Did Patricia Johnson raise her voice at any point during the conversation you observed?" Brenda, "No." "Did she threaten anyone?" "What did she do?" Brenda considered for a moment. She watched. She asked 2 questions, and then she went inside and came back out with folders and left. Raymond, 1 more question. In your 38 years as a school principal, you observed a great many disputes. In your assessment of what you witnessed that afternoon, how would you characterize Patricia Johnson's conduct? Daniel objected. Lay witness opinion. Judge Anderson sustained it, mildly, but allowed a reformulation. Raymond, what did you personally observe about Patricia Johnson's manner during the confrontation? Brenda, she was the calmest person in the yard. Raymond nodded once. No further questions. Daniel approached for cross. He was professional. Would you treat them with kindness? He asked whether Brenda considered herself a friend of Patricia's. She acknowledged a neighbor relationship. He asked whether that relationship could affect her recollection. Brenda looked at him with the composed patience of someone who has explained obvious things to adults for most of their career. I kept written notes the same day it happened. What I testified to is what's in the notes. She paused 1 beat. My feelings don't change what I wrote down. Daniel thanked her. She stepped down. Then Patricia took the stand. She crossed the room with the same pace she had used to cross the front yard 5 weeks ago, unhurried. Not performing calm, actually calm, in the way that comes from having done every possible piece of preparation and having nothing left to do but be present. She took the oath. She sat, she put her hands on the railing in front of her and looked at Raymond. Raymond began with the foundation, the trust, her parents, the property. Each question was a plank being laid across the record. Yes, she was the sole beneficiary. Yes, the property had been paid in full before she was married. Yes, she had maintained all major financial obligations throughout the marriage. No, she had never transferred any ownership interest to Anthony Wilson. No, she had never authorized him to exclude her from the property. Raymond walked through the financial history. She confirmed each payment. Property tax, annually, from her account. Insurance premiums. The roof replacement after the hail damage 3 years ago. The HVAC system replacement. The foundation inspection. The fence repair. Every major expenditure, documented, from her account or directly from the trust. Raymond set a bank statement printout on the evidence monitor. Does Anthony Wilson's name appear on any of these transactions? No. Did he contribute to any of these expenses? He paid utilities, electricity, internet, water, general living expenses. Raymond nodded. His contributions were to the cost of living in the property, not to the cost of owning it. Yes. Did you explain the trust structure to him at any point during the marriage? Patricia considered this carefully, not because she was uncertain of the answer, because she wanted to give it accurately. Claude, I tried to, on 3 separate occasions in the first 2 years of the marriage. He said he trusted me to handle it and didn't need the details. Raymond let that sit for a moment. Then, when he said he trusted you to handle it, did that indicate to you that he understood the trust's structure? No, it indicated he didn't want to spend time on it. Raymond moved to the events of the day the truck arrived. She described them in the same sequence she had written them in the notebook on the evening of that day. The drive onto the street, the decision to park across the road, the 30-second observation period, what she had memorized, the walk across, the conversation, the folders, the departure. During that conversation, Raymond said, "Did Anthony Wilson indicate he was aware the property belonged to the Johnson Family Trust?" He indicated he believed the property was his. Those are different things. Yes. When you went inside and retrieved the folders from the safe, what was Anthony's reaction? She thought back to that moment. He didn't react. He saw me come downstairs with folders, and I don't think he understood what they were. He assumed they were personal belongings. That would be consistent with how he treated the administrative life of the property throughout the marriage. Raymond looked at Judge Anderson briefly and then back at Patricia. The administrative life of the property. Can you explain what you mean by that? Insurance renewals, property tax filings, maintenance contracts, annual inspections, trust document reviews with our attorney. Anthony never participated in any of it. He considered it something I managed. And was that his choice? It was his preference. Did he ever ask to be involved? He said, on 3 occasions when I offered to walk him through the documents, that he trusted me to handle it. Raymond let that settle. Then he looked down at his notes and looked up. He picked up the photograph from the evidence table. Thomas Jackson planting the young sycamore sapling. Patricia beside him, 10 years old, holding the water bucket. I'm going to show you Plaintiff's Exhibit 14. He handed it to the clerk, who delivered a copy to the bench and to defense counsel. Do you recognize this photograph? Yes. It's my father planting the sycamore tree and I'm standing beside him. How old were you? 10. Is that tree still on the property? Yes. It's approximately 40 feet tall now. Raymond looked at the photograph for a moment. Then, did Anthony Wilson ever ask you about that tree? Where it came from? Who planted it? What it meant? Patricia answered without pause. No. Raymond nodded. He set the photograph down. He looked at her, and in a voice that was the same measured cadence it had been for the past 40 minutes, he asked the last question. When Anthony Wilson told you to leave, what did you do? I left. Why? You had every legal right to stay. She had thought about how to answer this. Not in the days before the trial. She had thought about it in August, standing on the 3rd stair, listening to a man she had trusted make a promise to someone else using her house as the currency. She had decided then, in that hallway, what kind of person she intended to be through whatever came next. And that decision had not required revision, because arguing about it wouldn't have changed the deed, she said. And I didn't need to argue. I just needed the record to be read. Raymond said nothing for a moment. Then, no further questions. Daniel Brooks was thorough. He asked about Anthony's utility payments. She confirmed them. He asked about the deck refinishing project. She confirmed it. He asked about the faucet replacement in the guest bathroom. She confirmed it. He built, methodically, the picture of a man who had contributed to the household in real and consistent ways throughout 8 years of marriage. She did not minimize any of it. Then Daniel asked, "You understood, didn't you, that Anthony believed he had an ownership stake in this property?" "I understood he believed that. And you didn't correct that belief during the marriage." She thought about the 3 conversations. The 3 times she had offered to walk through the documents. The 3 times he had said he trusted her to handle it. I tried to address it 3 times. He preferred not to engage with it. But you could have been more insistent. I could have been. Daniel left a pause there, suggesting that the pause itself was a kind of answer. Patricia did not fill it. Daniel, after you received that text message, the one telling you not to return, you chose not to respond. Correct. Why? because my attorney had already responded on my behalf, formally, with documentation. Daniel looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at his notes. Then he said, "No further questions." She stepped down. The closing arguments were the last thing. Raymond stood without notes. Gay. He looked at Judge Anderson with the directness of someone who had been in this courtroom many times and understood that the person across from him was not interested in being impressed. "This case," he said, "asks one question. Whether a man who received a formal legal notice that a property's title was held by a family trust, and who then continued to change locks, sign renovation contracts identifying himself as owner, send written communications excluding the legal owner, and tell colleagues he had kept the house, whether that course of conduct, taken after the notice, should be rewarded with the outcome he assumed before the notice was served." He paused, not for effect, for the structure of the next sentence to land on its own. "The documents in this record have never indicated it should." He returned to his seat. Daniel argued sincerely. He asked the court to consider the human context. 8 years. Real contribution. Genuine belief. He asked for the benefit of a doubt that the documented record made very difficult to locate. When Daniel sat down, Judge Anderson looked at her notes. She looked at them for a long time. The courtroom was the quietest it had been all morning. Then she looked up. "The court finds the certified property records authentic and controlling. Would you treat them with kindness?" She spoke with the steady pace of someone issuing something that would go into the permanent record, and that would therefore be said precisely and without revision. "The Johnson Family Trust has remained the legal owner of the subject residential property in Fulton County throughout the period at issue in this matter." Patricia's hands were on the table. "Still, Patricia Johnson is the sole beneficial owner of the property." Anthony was looking at the bench. His expression had gone somewhere she had not seen it go before. Not the relief smile from the driveway. Not the confidence from the party. Not the controlled composure from the preliminary hearing. Something more private. Something that might have been the face a man makes when he finally, after a very long time, understands the full dimensions of a mistake. The court furthered them with kindness. The court further finds that Anthony Wilson continued to assert an ownership interest in the property after receiving formal legal notice that no such interest was recorded, and that his conduct in the weeks following that notice, including the replacement of exterior locks, the execution of renovation contracts, in which he identified himself as property owner, and written communications excluding the legal owner from the premises, represents a pattern of conduct that this court cannot characterize as inadvertent. Judge Anderson looked at both attorneys. Judgment is entered in favor of Patricia Johnson. Defendant is ordered to vacate the premises within 14 days and to cooperate fully with the return of possession to plaintiff. All evidence preservation orders remain in effect until possession is restored and confirmed. She closed the file. The gavel came down once. Patricia sat for a moment after everyone began to move. She did not cry. She was not going to cry in this room, not because crying was wrong, but because she had spent 5 months in a particular kind of control that had served its purpose, and the moment for releasing it was not here. In the fluorescent light of courtroom 4B, surrounded by attorneys and clerks, and the man who had handed someone else a key to a front door. She put her hand on the navy blue notebook on the table beside her binder. She had carried it in every day and had not opened it once. She had not needed to. The documents had done everything she had spent years preparing them to do. She picked it up. Raymond touched her arm lightly and then let go. "It's done." She looked at him. 63 years old, silver-haired, the man who had sat across from her parents at the walnut table in his conference room, and helped them build something that had just held up against 5 months of pressure without a single crack. "Thank you." He shook his head, once small. "Your parents did the work, long before today." She felt that sentence in the part of her chest that had been quiet and held and careful for a very long time. Across the room, Anthony stood with Daniel. "Would you treat them with kindness?" He was not looking at Patricia. He was looking at the middle distance of the room in the direction of nothing in particular, the way people look when they are standing inside a conclusion they had not believed was possible. She did not go to him. There was nothing left between them that required proximity. Their attorneys would handle the 14-day transition, the inventory, the return of keys, the documentation of the handover. Would you treat them with kindness? Everything that needed to happen would happen through the proper channels, in the proper order, with the proper paperwork. That was the way of it. That had always been the way of it. She walked out of the courtroom into the hallway. Brenda was waiting outside the door. Would you treat them with kindness? She had left the gallery a few minutes before the gavel and was standing with her coat folded over her arm and her hands together, and when she saw Patricia's face, she read it in the way that she had been reading faces for 4 decades, and her own face did something quiet and significant. She said, "Well." Patricia said, "Well." They stood in the hallway for a moment, 2 women from the same street, one of whom was 36 and one of whom was 70, and both of whom had written things down on the days that mattered, and neither of whom needed to say anything further about what had just happened in that room. "I'll see you on the street," Brenda said. "Yes, you will." Brenda walked toward the elevator. Patricia watched her go. Then she walked the other direction, toward the window at the end of the hall that looked out over downtown Atlanta. The city was going about its Tuesday morning. Traffic on the street below. A lunch cart being pushed along the sidewalk. A courier on a bicycle at full speed, threading between delivery trucks. She stood at the window for 2 minutes. Then she called Raymond's office to confirm the next steps and was told he was already calling to schedule the possession return protocol. She thanked Evelyn and ended the call. She took the elevator down. She walked to a car in the parking structure. She sat inside it for a moment, both hands on the wheel, engine off. Not 30 seconds this time. Maybe 90, maybe 2 minutes. And then she started the car. The 14 days were quiet, in the way that countdowns are quiet when you know the number and you know what it ends with. Anthony coordinated the move out through Daniel. There was no direct contact. Raymond confirmed the arrangements on Patricia's side. Anthony would remove everything he had brought into the property, plus items from the renovation he had paid for personally. Fixtures attached to the structure would remain. The inventory was conducted by a neutral third party. Patricia did not go to the street during those 14 days. She was not required to, and she chose not to. On the 15th morning, Raymond met her in the driveway. The day was overcast. The particular flat gray of Atlanta in late November, the kind of sky that felt like a held breath. The certified locksmith. They had arranged someone different from Parker Lock and Key. Not out of spite but out of order, because returning possession required its own documentation and its own paper trail was already at the front door when they arrived. Raymond watched the locksmith work. When it was done, the locksmith handed Patricia a small envelope containing 2 keys. She accepted it. The locksmith had her sign a receipt. He signed one too. Raymond photographed both signatures with his phone. Another document, another timestamp. Raymond held the envelope out. Officially, she took the keys. She stood on the front porch for a moment. The porch where her mother had kept a fern every summer until the summer she got sick and stopped being able to tend it. Where her father had read this kindness. Where her father had read the Sunday paper, in the same chair for 20 years until the chair finally gave out, and he had refused to replace it with anything that wasn't at least as comfortable. Where Anthony Wilson had stood 14 weeks ago, holding a spare key and calling it a new beginning. She turned the key in the new lock. The door opened. The smell of the house hit her immediately. Paint, clean surfaces, emptiness. The particular air of a space that has recently been vacated, which carries the ghost of the people who were in it, without carrying anything of the people who were supposed to be. Would you treat them with kindness? The living room furniture was gone, replaced by the few original pieces that had been in storage, the side table her mother had bought at an estate sale, the reading chair that had been in the house since Patricia was a teenager. She walked through each room. The kitchen was the hardest. The white cabinets were still there. That was part of what remained structurally. The quartz countertop. The new appliances. Monica's choices in Patricia's kitchen, which would take some time to become neutral. Not impossible. Just not today. She touched the edge of the counter and let her hand rest there for a moment, which was all the time she was going to spend on it right now. She went down the hallway, into the room her father had used as a study. The shelves were bare. Would you treat them with kindness? A few boxes of her own belongings stacked in the corner where Raymond had coordinated their delivery. She crossed the room to the window that faced the backyard. The rose bed along the left fence was overgrown from weeks of inattention. She would need to tend it before the first hard frost. She went back to the living room, and she saw it. On the dining table, the original table, one of the pieces that had been returned, sitting in the center, arranged with care. The photograph. The framed treat them with kindness. The framed picture of Thomas Jackson and Linda Brown at their 20th anniversary. The one Patricia had pulled from the wall during the first week of the dispute and put into storage, where it had remained. The cracked glass had been replaced. The frame had been cleaned. It had been placed there intentionally, in the center of the table, where it could not be missed. She stood very still for a long time. She did not know if it was Anthony or Monica who had placed it there. She did not know which of them had had it repaired. She thought about asking Raymond to find out, and then she thought about it for another moment, and then she decided it did not matter. What mattered was that it was here, that someone, in the final days of their time in this house, had chosen to leave something behind that belonged here, had chosen to acknowledge, in the only private way available to them, that they understood this at the end, even if they had not understood it at the beginning. She picked up the photograph. Her parents looked back at her from 31 years ago. Her mother's laugh lines. Her father's particular with kindness. Her father's particular expression, the one he reserved for moments of genuine happiness, where the usual composure he carried through his working life dropped away, and you could see the man underneath. Would you treat them with kindness? The man who planted trees for daughters who hadn't been born yet and filed documents with attorneys, so that what he built would stand past the length of his own life. She carried the photograph to the living room shelf. The shelf beside the window that faced the front yard. She placed it in the spot where it had always lived, where the afternoon light found it on clear days and made the silver of the frame catch. Then she went to the window. Outside, the sycamore filled the frame completely. Bare branches now in late November, the last of the leaves down and scattered on the lawn. The trunk was enormous, dark, settled into the ground with the permanence of something that had decided long ago to stay. In spring it would go green first. In summer it would provide shade across the entire front of the house. In October it would turn gold before anything else on the street. Thomas Jackson had known all of that when he chose it. She heard Raymond behind her. He had given her space since they came inside, had stayed in the entryway, reviewing something on his phone, in the particular way of a man who has business to attend to and also understands when business is not the point. But now he came to stand beside her at the window, not close enough to intrude, close enough to share the view. He looked at the tree for a moment. He was right, Raymond said, about the tree. She looked at him. He smiled. He told me once, a long time ago, that he was planting it for the long game. Raymond kept looking at the tree. He said property is never really about what it's worth. It's about what it means to the person who earns the right to stand in front of it. Patricia looked back at the sycamore. The branches reached in every direction. Nothing uncertain about them, nothing provisional. Would you treat them with kindness? The tree had been growing here for 26 years and had no particular interest in whatever had been happening inside the house during the past 14 weeks. It simply continued. Put down roots while no one was watching. Grew toward light regardless of what the light was coming from. That was what her parents had tried to build. Not just the trust, not just the deed, not just the account history, and the tax records and the certified copies filed with Raymond's office. All of that was real and all of that had mattered, but underneath all of it was something that documents could not fully contain, which was the intention. The belief that what you built carefully and honestly and with the right preparation was worth building, that it would last, that someday someone would be standing in a courtroom holding a stack of perfectly organized folders, and those folders would say what they had all be clear, and the judge would read them, and whoever it was that was standing there would be able to walk back through the front door and place a photograph on an one a shelf, and look planted for exactly this moment that someone planted for Alexane, planted exactly this moment that Tasvi. She exhaled. It was a long breath, the kind that carries something with it when it goes. Come on, she said. I need to look at the rest of the house. And she walked away from the window, back into the rooms she had grown up in, with the quiet and specific intention of a woman who was not arriving somewhere new, who was simply, after a very long detour through rooms that had briefly belonged to the wrong story, coming home. 6 weeks later, Brenda Wright knocked on the front door on a Saturday morning carrying a potted lavender plant. My garden produced one extra. She held it out. I thought your porch could use it. Patricia accepted it. They stood in the doorway for a moment looking out at the street. The neighbor across the way was raking leaves. A dog was being walked by someone she didn't recognize. An ordinary Saturday on an ordinary street. It feels right again, Brenda said, meaning the house. Patricia looked at the sycamore. It was always right. I just had to get back to it. Brenda nodded. She did not offer further commentary. She had said what she came to say, which was what people who understood something say when they understand it briefly, directly, and without the need for elaboration. She walked back across the street. Patricia set the lavender on the porch railing, went inside. The house was quiet in the way of a Saturday morning, not empty, just settled. She put water on for coffee, opened the back door to let in the November air, which had turned properly cold now, the kind of cold that meant winter was serious about arriving. The rose bed needed attention. She could see it from the back step. She was going to need her gloves. The coffee maker finished. She poured a cup. Would you treat them with kindness? Stood at the kitchen window, her mother's window, the one that faced the yard at the angle that caught the morning light, and drank it while it was still hot. The yard was bare and necessary looking. The kind of bare that was not depleted but resting, getting ready for spring. Raymond had closed the final file the previous week, called her on a Thursday afternoon with the particular brevity of a man who knows when a thing is finished. The county recorder has confirmed. The enforcement documentation is complete. There are no outstanding actions. She had said, "Thank you, Raymond." He had said, "Your father would have liked how this ended." She had thought about that for a long time after the call, not because it gave her peace immediately, because it gave her something more durable than peace, which was the understanding that what had happened here was not just hers, it was her parents' story too. The long game they had played, the decisions they had made at kitchen tables and in attorneys' offices and at the county recorder's window, decisions that had protected something they loved, something they built, something they believed was worth the work of building correctly. The documents had said what they always said, and the truth had found its place exactly where they had put it. She finished the coffee. She rinsed the cup. She got her gloves from the hook by the back door, where they had always hung, where she had put them when she moved back in, because that was where they went, and where they had always gone, and where they would continue to go, because some things belong in exactly the place they have always been. She stepped out into the November morning, and she began to tend what she had come back to.